Interrex would appoint another senator to succeed him for another 5-day term. This process would continue until a new king was elected. Once the Interrex found a suitable nominee to the kingship, he would bring the nominee before the Senate and the Senate would review him. If the Senate passed the nominee, the Interrex would convene the Curiate Assembly and preside over it during the election of the king. Once the nominee was proposed to the Curiate Assembly, the people of Rome could either accept or reject him. If accepted, the king-elect did not immediately enter office. 2 other acts still had to take place before he was invested with full regal authority and power. First, it was necessary to obtain the divine will of the gods respecting his appointment by means of the auspices, since the king would serve as high priest of Rome. This ceremony was performed by an augur, who conducted the king-elect to the citadel, where he was placed on a stone seat as the people waited below. If found worthy of the kingship, the augur announced that the gods had given favorable tokens, thus confirming the king's priestly character. The second act which had to be performed was the conferral of the imperium upon the king. The Curiate Assembly's previous vote only determined who was to be king, and had not by that act bestowed the necessary power of the king upon him. Accordingly, the king himself proposed to the Curiate Assembly a law granting him imperium, and the Curiate Assembly by voting in favor of the law would grant it. In theory, the people of Rome elected their leader, but the Senate had most of the control over the process. Senate. According to legend, Romulus established the Senate after he founded Rome by personally selecting the most noble men, wealthy men with legitimate wives and children, to serve as a council for the city. As such, the Senate was the king's advisory council as the Council of State. The Senate was composed of 300 senators with 100 senators representing each of the 3 ancient tribes of Rome, the Rams, Latins, Titides, Sabines, and Luceres, Etruscans. Within each tribe, a senator was selected from each of the tribe's 10 curiae. The king had the sole authority to appoint the senators, but this selection was done in accordance with ancient custom. Under the monarchy, the Senate possessed very little power and authority as the king held most of the political power of the state and could exercise those powers without the Senate's consent. The chief function of the Senate was to serve as the king's counsel and be his legislative coordinator. Once legislation proposed by the king passed the Curiate Assembly, the Senate could either veto it or accept it as law. The king was, by custom, to seek the advice of the Senate on major issues. However, it was left to him to decide what issues, if any, were brought before them, and he was free to accept or reject their advice as he saw fit. Only the king possessed the power to convene the Senate, except during the interregnum, during which the Senate possessed the authority to convene itself. Military kings of Rome. Years BC dates follow Livy's chronology of reign lengths. Consult particular article for details of each king. Year king. Other notable information. 753–716 Romulus. Myth of Romulus and Remus, founder of Rome, established Roman Senate army, first religious institutions. 715–672 Numa Pompilius established many of Rome's most important religious and political institutions, introduced 12-month solar calendar. 672–640 Chalash Hostilius defeated and destroyed Alba Longa, integrated the noble Alban families into Roman aristocracy. 640–616 Gancus Marcius established port of Ostia, defeated the Sabines. 616–578 Tarquinius Priscus expanded Roman hegemony over Latium, doubled membership in the Senate. 600, drained the Roman Forum, and constructed the Cloaca Maxima and Circus Maximus. 578–534 Servius Tullius established the Servian tribes and the centuries, built the Temple of Diana and a new wall around the city, instituted the Compitalia. 534-509 Tarquinius Superbus, last king of Rome, overthrew Servius, conquered various Latin cities and established colonies, built the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, deposed and Roman Republic established. Romulus. A map of Rome in 753 BC. Colors show topography, with green lowlands and brown islands. The Latin names of hills are included in all caps. Son of the Vestal Virgin Rhea Silvia, ostensibly by the god Mars, the legendary Romulus was Rome's founder and first king. After he and his twin brother Remus had deposed King Aemilius of Alba and reinstated the king's brother and their grandfather Numitor to the throne, they decided to build a city in the area where they had been abandoned as infants. After killing Remus in a dispute, Romulus began building the city on the Palatine Hill. His work began with fortifications. He permitted men of all classes to come to Rome as citizens, including slaves and freemen without distinction. 5. He is credited with establishing the city's religious, legal and political institutions. The kingdom was established by unanimous acclaim with him at the helm when Romulus called the citizenry to a council for the purposes of determining the government. 6, 7, 8, 9. Romulus established the Senate as an advisory council with the appointment of 100 of the most noble men in the community. These men he called paters, from pater, father, head, and their descendants became the patricians. To project command, he surrounded himself with attendants, in particular the 12 lictors. 6, 10. He created 3 divisions of horsemen, equites, called centuries, Rams, Romans, Titans, after the Sabine king, and the Luceres, Etruscans. He also divided the populace into 30 curiae, named after 30 of the Sabine women who had intervened to end the war between Romulus and Titius. The curiae formed the voting units in the popular assemblies. Comitia Curiata. 11. Romulus was behind one of the most notorious acts in Roman history, the incident commonly known as the rape of the Sabine women. To provide his citizens with wives, Romulus invited the neighboring tribes to a festival in Rome where the Romans committed a mass abduction of young women from among the attendees. The account vary from 30 to 683 women taken, a significant number for a population of 3,000 Latins, and presumably for the Sabines as well. War broke out when Romulus refused to return the captives. After the Sabines made 3 unsuccessful attempts to invade the hill settlements of Rome, the women themselves. Growth of the city region during the kingdom intervened during the Battle of the Lacus Curtius to end war. The two peoples were united in a joint kingdom, with Romulus and the Sabine king Titus Titius sharing the throne. 12, 13, 14. In addition to the war with Sabines, Romulus waged war with the Fidenates and Viants and others. 15. He reigned for 37 years. 16, 17. According to legend, Romulus vanished at age 54, 17, while reviewing his troops on the Campus Martius. He was reported to have been taken up to Mount Olympus in a whirlwind and made a god. After initial acceptance with public, rumors and suspicions of foul play by the patricians began to grow. In particular, some thought that members of the nobility had murdered him, dismembered his body, and buried the pieces on their land. 18. These were set aside after an esteemed nobleman testified that Romulus had come to him in a vision and told him that he was the god Quirinus. 19. He became, not only one of the 3 major gods of Rome, but the very likeness of the city itself. 20. 21. A replica of Romulus' hut was maintained in the center of Rome until the end of the Roman Empire. 22. Numa Pompilius. Numa depicted on a 48 BC denarius after Romulus died. There was an interregnum for 1 year, during which 10 men chosen from the Senate governed Rome as successive enterages. Under popular pressure, the Senate finally chose the Sabine Numa Pompilius to succeed Romulus, on account of his reputation for justice and piety. The choice was accepted by the Curiate Assembly. 23, 24, 25. Numa's reign was marked by peace and religious reform. He constructed a new temple to Janus and, after establishing peace with Rome's neighbors, closed the doors of the temple to indicate a statute of peace. They remained closed for the rest of his reign. 26. He established the Vestal Virgins at Rome, as well as the Salii and Flamines for Jupiter, Mars and Quirinus. He also established the officiant duties of Pontifex Maximus. Numa reigned for 43 years. 27, 28. He reformed the Roman calendar by adjusting it for the solar and the lunar year, as well as by adding the months of January and February to bring the total number of months to 12. 26. Tullus Hostilius. Tullus Hostilius was as warlike as Romulus had been, completely unlike Numa as he lacked any respect for the gods. Tullus waged war against Alba Longa, Fidena and Veii and the Sabines. During Tullus's reign, the city of Alba Longa was completely destroyed and Tullus integrated its population into Rome. 29. Tullus is attributed with constructing a new home for the Senate, the Curia Hostilia, which survived for 562 years after his death. According to Livy, Tullus neglected the worship of the gods until, towards the end of his reign, he fell ill and became superstitious. However, when Tullus called upon Jupiter and begged assistance, Jupiter responded with a bolt of lightning that burned the king and his house to ashes. 30, 31. His reign lasted for 32 years. 32. Ancus Marcius. Ancus Marcius depicted on a 57 denarius following the mysterious death of Tullus. The Romans elected a peaceful and religious king in his place, Numa's grandson, Ancus Marcius. Much like his grandfather, Ancus did little to expand the borders of Rome and only fought wars to defend the territory. He also built Rome's first prison on the Capitoline Hill. 33. Ancus further fortified the Janiculum Hill on the western bank, and built the first bridge across the Tiber River. He also founded the port of Ostia Antica on the Tyrrhenian Sea and established Rome's first salt works, as well as the city's first aqueduct. Rome grew, as Ancus's diplomacy to peacefully unite smaller surrounding cities into alliance with Rome. Thus, he completed the conquest of the Latins and relocated them to the Aventine Hill, thus forming the plebeian class of Romans. 34. He died a natural death, like his grandfather, after 25 years as king, marking the end of Rome's Latin Sabine kings. 32. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus was the 5th king of Rome and the first of Etruscan birth. After immigrating to Rome, he gained favor with Ancus, who later adopted him as son. Upon ascending the throne, he waged wars against the Sabines and Etruscans, doubling the size of Rome and bringing great treasures to the city. To accommodate the influx of population, the Aventine and Silian hills were populated. 35. One of his first reforms was to add 100 new members to the Senate from the conquered Etruscan tribes, bringing the total number of senators to 200. He used the treasures Rome had acquired from the conquests to build great monuments for Rome. Among these were Rome's great sewer systems, the Cloaca Maxima, which he used to drain the swamp-like area between the 7 hills of Rome. In its place, he began construction on the Roman Forum. He also founded the Roman Games. Priscus initiated great building projects, including the city's first bridge, the Pons Sublicius. 36. The most famous is the Circus Maximus, a giant stadium for chariot races. After that, he started the building of the temple fortress to the god Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. However, before it was completed, he was killed by a son of Ancus Marcius, after 38 years as king. 32. His reign is best remembered for introducing the Roman symbols of military and civil offices, and the Roman triumph, being the first Roman to celebrate 1. 37. Servius Tullius,